guys, so just want to give you a little update on the RX7. Today my goal was to address the oil system. I talked to my buddy who actually was the person who originally developed the FD LS kit at Suki. He no longer works there, but he gave me some heads up on a couple of things to look out for. This is a newer iteration of the swap kit, and the oil in and outlets on the oil pan were actually tapped to 3/8 NPT, which have been known to cause some oiling issues. So he told me that I should tap it to 1/2 inch NPT. So I dropped the subframe and had to re-drill and tap the oil pan to 1/2 inch NPT to -10. The reverse switch is typically just the connector just connects right onto the switch. But the switch is so close to the tunnel that you can't actually get the connector on. So I modified the switch, put some wires into it, and potted it with epoxy. And then I'll put a connector on the end of these two wires here, and that'll allow it to come out at a 90-degree angle and clear the trans tunnel. I'll just put a DTM connector on each end of these, and it'll be good to go. Alright, so I dug a little deeper into the RX7 and made quite a bit of progress. The first thing I worked on was the fuel system. Went up front and installed the oil system, did a couple little custom things there. Got the tune loaded onto it, and it may or may not have started, we'll see. Alright, so the first thing we're going to go over is the fuel system. The first thing I did was pull everything off the car. The factory feed and return line went all the way to the front of the car. I got rid of that. Dropped the tank down and took all the evap crap off the top of the tank, which I'm not going to run anymore. I mounted the basically the factory GM fuel filter and pressure regulator right here. It's pretty easy to get to. Mounted to a factory spot on the car, which is nice. And that way I didn't have to run a return line all the way from the front of the car to the back. So the return line comes basically right back out of the filter and back into the tank, which makes it more simple and saves me a little money in line and fittings. I'll show you what I did on the front for the fuel system on the actual motor, and then we'll go to the oil system from there. All right, so this is what I did with the fuel system up front. I came up with a single feed line, came to a Y adapter here, and it goes to each side, each fuel rail. Sometimes you can feed it to one, then jump over to the other one. I opted to do it like this. That's pretty much it for the fuel system. On the oiling right here, this is actually a FD oil pressure sensor for the oil pressure gauge on the dash, and I wanted that to work. So what I did was got an adapter fitting for the oil pressure, where the oil pressure gauge goes on the LS, which is back here behind the intake manifold. And then I adapted it to a -3. They use this -3, basically like a brake line, up to another adapter that adapts it to the oil pressure sensor for the dash. First thing I did was get the lines mounted coming out of the oil pan. It's the coming out of the pump to the oil filter housing and then back into the motor. After thinking about it for a while, I decided that I wanted it basically in this location. And when I was looking at it, I noticed that this is the factory sway bar mount. I noticed that it's actually
it does have a bend in it like this from the factory, but it's also tweaked a little, and it was rubbing on the control arm here because these are kind of thin sheet metal brackets, and over time I guess it's the thing on the FD that they bend. So I made these custom mounts out of aluminum, and I raised it a couple inches to actually give me more clearance on the sway bar. And doing that, I was able to make this custom bracket to mount the oil filter housing to. So it's kind of 2 birds with 1 stone, worked out pretty slick. That pretty much buttoned up the oil system. All right, so for the throttle cable, what I did was I took the factory throttle cable, the RX7 throttle cable, cut the end off of it where it attaches to the pedal, pulled the guts out of it, and actually put it through a aftermarket like cable sheathing here. And that way I was able to use the factory cable, but with basically a LS swap cable sheathing. So I kind of put 2 together. And then I machined a custom fitting for the end of it that has a set screw and it holds it to the factory pedal just like it was with the stock cable. It actually works out really good. One thing you might have noticed is the little sensor just hanging out right here. So this is the air temp sensor, and it will go into a little intake that I'll have to build, a little intake tube that I'll build right here. And so what this is for is, since I've deleted the stock MAF, the mass airflow meter, I'm going to be tuning with a strategy called speed density. It relies on an air temperature sensor and then a manifold absolute pressure sensor, and to calculate the fueling that the engine needs. So I moved the battery to the back, and what I did is took out the factory strut tower bar here and built this bar that holds the battery. That way I didn't have to drill any holes in the car. It's kind of dual purpose. I'll probably put some sort of cross bracing or lateral bars in there. I just have to figure out where to mount them to, because the battery's pretty heavy, and so when you're accelerating and braking, I don't want this thing flopping around. So, but for now this works well, and got the ground cable that'll tuck up right along the bar here, grounds to the chassis, and it actually works pretty well. So basically the last thing I did on the motor was the coolant system. I got some of the hoses all hooked up. This is the steam port coming out of the top of the heads, goes into the expansion tank here, and then the expansion tank feeds the radiator. So the cap's actually up here because the radiator sits low, and you want the cap at the highest point in the system. So that's why this is up here. I converted it to -6 line here, just cleaner, easier to service. I also got some LS swap heater hoses, but they come like 60 inches long, so you can pretty much use them on anything you swap an LS into. That's it for the cooling system. It's a pretty easy system. So I guess what we have left to do on the car is I need to build the intake tube so I can get the air temp sensor put in there and finish the exhaust so that I can get the O2 sensors put in and then start tuning. In addition to the intake and the exhaust, I need to make a coolant overflow tank somewhere and a oil catch can. So we've got the breather coming out of the valley pan, and then the 2 off of the valve covers. And I'll probably make a single unit that's divided, that looks nice, that'll be both the coolant overflow and the oil catch can, that has one side for the catch can and one side for the overflow. And I'm not sure where I'm going to put it, maybe here, maybe over there, not sure yet, but I'll fab something up. I'd like to make something that is kind of dual purpose. This is the first start of the engine in the chassis. As you can hear, it doesn't sound the best. 1, it doesn't have exhaust on it, and 2, the engine still needs completely tuned. what I was doing is checking that the base calibration would start the car and that the gauges were all working. Everything checked out, so we seem to be heading in the right direction. That's it for this episode, and on the next episode my wife will be covering me doing some fabrication work, and I will be going over some techniques that I use when building an exhaust. And as always, if you have any questions, ask in the comments, and we'll see you next time.